Rowan Atkinson became one of the biggest comedy legends in the world without saying much at all. With barely a few words, he made hundreds of millions of people laugh. But there was a reason silence became such a huge part of his comedy, and it had nothing to do with making people laugh. Now, at 71, Rowan has finally opened up about the struggle that shaped his entire life, and once you know what really happened to him as a child, you'll never see that famous Mr. Bean expression the same way again. Rowan Sebastian Atkinson was born on January 6, 1955, in County Durham, England, the youngest of 4 brothers. Before he was even old enough to remember, the family suffered a heartbreaking loss when his eldest brother, Paul, died as an infant. His father, Eric, ran the family farm before starting his own business, while his mother, Ella May, kept the family together. On the outside, Rowan's childhood looked peaceful, nothing like the wild characters he would one day create. But everything changed when he was about 5 years old and developed a severe stutter. At Durham Choristers School, where he studied as a boarder, speaking became the hardest part of every day. Teachers remembered him as quiet and intelligent, but many classmates mocked the way he spoke, with some even calling him an alien. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who attended the same school a few years later admitted he remembered how badly Rowan was teased. Then something unexpected happened. Every time Rowan stepped onto a stage, his stutter completely disappeared. The moment the performance ended, it came back. He didn't understand why, but acting somehow allowed him to speak freely in a way normal conversation never could. While dealing with those struggles, Rowan excelled in his studies, earning top grades before studying electrical and electronic engineering at Newcastle University. After graduating in 1975, he continued to Queen's College, Oxford, where he began a master's degree and even worked toward a PhD in control systems. Everyone expected him to become an engineer, but Oxford introduced him to something that quietly changed his future. There he met writer Richard Curtis, who noticed that the shy student who barely spoke during rehearsals became a completely different person the second he stepped onto the stage. His silent sketches and expressive performances left audiences amazed, and in 1976 he performed with the Oxford Revue at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, earning his first real attention. Even then, success didn't come easily. The BBC rejected him several times because executives couldn't understand his unusual style of visual comedy. Under the pressure of auditions, his stutter became even worse, and Rowan seriously thought about giving up acting and returning to engineering. But he remembered the lesson he had discovered years earlier. When he became a character, his speech flowed naturally. He didn't need to overcome his stutter as Rowan Atkinson. He simply needed someone else to do the talking for him. That breakthrough finally led him to Not the 9 o'clock news, although its first broadcast would prove to be anything but smooth. When Not the 9 o'clock news finally premiered, things couldn't have started much worse. A general election delayed its release, and when it finally aired in 1980, hardly anyone watched. The few reviews it received were brutal, with one critic calling it the worst half-hour of television ever made. Most shows would have disappeared after that, but one BBC executive believed it deserved another chance and ordered a second season. That single decision changed everything. The new series introduced the unforgettable Gerald the Gorilla sketch, with Rowan dressed in a gorilla suit delivering a hilarious rant that won awards and made him a household name almost overnight. Once again, his biggest success came while hiding behind a costume instead of simply being himself. Around the same time, the show also produced the comedy song I Like Trucking, and what many viewers didn't know was that Rowan was actually driving the truck himself. Years earlier, while struggling to find acting work, he had earned a real Class 1 truck driving license as a backup plan. It was a perfect example of how his mind worked. Even while chasing comedy, he always made sure he had something practical to fall back on. By 1982, despite the show's huge success, the cast decided to walk away. The constant pressure, endless writing, and demanding schedule had worn everyone down, especially Rowan, who was still quietly battling the anxiety that had followed him since childhood. Instead of taking a break, he moved on to another ambitious project, Blackadder. The first season nearly failed. High production costs, bad weather, and mixed reviews pushed the series close to cancellation, but an international Emmy convinced the BBC to give it one more chance. That decision paid off. With a smaller budget, sharper writing from Ben Elton, and Rowan's brilliant performance, Blackadder became one of Britain's greatest sitcoms. By the final series, Blackadder Goes Forth, the show had achieved something few comedies ever do. Set during the First World War, it balanced laughter with the heartbreaking reality of war, ending with a final scene that is still remembered as one of television's greatest endings. Rowan later admitted that working with Hugh Laurie and Tony Robinson created a chemistry that could never be repeated. Then, in 1990, everything changed again with the arrival of Mr. Bean. The silent character quickly became a worldwide phenomenon, reaching more than 245 countries and turning Rowan into one of the most recognizable faces on Earth. But while audiences saw effortless comedy, Rowan experienced something very different. Because Bean barely spoke, every joke depended on perfect facial expressions, body language, and precise timing. He later admitted that filming the character was physically and mentally exhausting, leaving him completely drained after every shoot. There was nowhere to hide. Every movement had to be exactly right, and even during the filming of Mr. Bean's Holiday, Rowan pushed himself to the limit to make the silent comedy look completely effortless. Filming Mr. Bean's Holiday pushed Rowan harder than almost anything he'd done before. For one short scene, he had to chase a group of cyclists through the countryside of Provence. It only lasted a few seconds on screen, but behind the cameras it was a completely different story. Rowan wasn't a cyclist or an athlete, and he later admitted he genuinely thought he might collapse from exhaustion while filming it. To audiences it looked effortless. To him, it was one more reminder of how physically demanding the role had become. Some relief finally came in 2002 when the animated Mr. Bean series allowed him to keep the character alive without putting his body through the same punishment. Many fans now believe his appearance at the 2012 London Olympics, where Bean hilariously interrupted chariots of fire in front of around 900 million viewers, was his real goodbye to the character. The performance looked simple, but Rowan later revealed it left him exhausted for weeks, proving once again that the easiest-looking comedy often required the hardest work. Rowan has often explained his comedy using ideas from legends he admired. He loved Charlie Chaplin's belief that life is a tragedy up close but a comedy from a distance, and he also admired French filmmaker Jacques Tati, who believed great comedy came from movement rather than words. That way of thinking perfectly matched Rowan's personality. Even after studying engineering, he approached comedy almost like a science, carefully testing every expression, every movement, and every second until it worked exactly the way he wanted. Not every role demanded the same physical effort. When Disney asked him to voice Zazu in The Lion King, Rowan wasn't especially interested at first and accepted mainly because it was another acting job. The film went on to become one of the biggest animated movies ever made, yet fans still wonder why he never returned for the 2019 remake. During the same period, he also starred in The Thin Blue Line as the hopeless but well-meaning Inspector Raymond Fowler, a performance many fans still consider one of the most underrated of his career. Even when playing characters who talked far more than Mr. Bean, Rowan's comedy relied on the same careful timing that had made him famous. Years later, even after saying he wanted to move away from exhausting physical comedy, he returned with Man vs. Bee in 2022. Filmed during the COVID lockdowns, the production faced unusual challenges, with the crew forced to build an entire luxury house because real homeowners wouldn't allow filming on their properties. Rowan later admitted he actually preferred the simpler style of his early Bean sketches, believing comedy often worked better when it wasn't buried under expensive productions. Away from the cameras, his private life was far quieter. While working on Blackadder in the late 1980s, he met makeup artist Sinatra Sastry. According to friends, Rowan even changed makeup teams just to spend more time talking to her, much to the disappointment of his close friend Stephen Fry, who had also hoped to ask her out. Rowan and Sinatra married in 1990, with Fry serving as his best man, and together they welcomed 2 children, Lily and Benjamin. Then, during a family holiday in Kenya in 2001, something unbelievable happened. Their small charter plane was flying at around 16,000 feet when the pilot suddenly lost consciousness. As Sinatra tried desperately to wake him, Rowan climbed into the pilot's seat despite having no flying experience and managed to keep the aircraft stable until the pilot regained consciousness and landed safely. It remains one of the most remarkable stories of his life. The man who spent decades pretending to be hopelessly clumsy on screen stayed calm enough to help save his family's lives before quietly flying home as if nothing extraordinary had happened. After nearly 24 years together, Rowan and Sinatra divorced in 2015. Soon after, he began a relationship with actress Louise Ford, who is 27 years younger than him, and in 2017 they welcomed a daughter, making Rowan a father again at 62. The relationship attracted plenty of headlines, but Rowan handled it the same way he had always handled his private life. He simply stayed quiet. That silence, however, never meant he was afraid to speak when something truly mattered to him. In 2012, he appeared before Parliament to argue against expanding hate speech laws, saying that even unpopular opinions deserved legal protection. His comments divided public opinion, but they also became part of a much bigger national conversation. More than a decade later, he stirred controversy again by questioning whether electric vehicles were really as environmentally friendly as many believed. Critics quickly pointed out his famous collection of performance cars, but Rowan stood by his views, showing that he was willing to defend an opinion even when he knew it would be unpopular. Ironically, for someone who struggled to speak as a child, he never hesitated to use his voice when he believed it mattered. By 2025, the success of Mr. Bean had reached unbelievable levels. The official YouTube channel had gathered tens of millions of subscribers and billions of views, all driven by a character who barely says a word. In 2024, the animated series finally confirmed a fan theory that had existed for decades, revealing that Mr. Bean really was an alien, something Rowan had jokingly hinted at years earlier. Yet despite creating one of the most successful comedy characters in history, Rowan admitted during a 2018 interview with Graham Norton that he had never completely shaken his self-doubt. He confessed that the pressure, the exhaustion, and the feeling of never quite being good enough had stayed with him throughout his career. Behind the famous expressions in silent comedy was still the same little boy who discovered that acting was the only place where his stutter disappeared. Fans have sensed that side of him for years. Under interviews and documentaries, thousands describe him as thoughtful, mysterious, and incredibly careful with every word he speaks. Some even say it feels as though he talks about his characters like they were separate people he simply observed rather than created himself. Others remember watching complete strangers from different countries laugh together at the exact same Mr. Bean sketch without sharing a single word of the same language. That may be Rowan Atkinson's greatest achievement. He proved that real comedy doesn't always need dialogue. Sometimes a single look, one expression, or a moment of silence can connect people across the entire world. So here's something worth thinking about. Have you ever known someone who only found their confidence after stepping into a different role, whether on stage, at work, or somewhere life gave them the chance to become someone new? Let us know in the comments. And if Rowan Atkinson's silent comedy has ever made you laugh, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more Untold celebrity stories, and we'll see you in the next one.